The Miami Dolphins exist because a Minnesota lawyer bribed the wrong politician. In 1965, Joe Robbie was a Democratic Party fundraiser in Minneapolis with no sports experience, no interest in football, and a very specific problem. He needed to launder political donations through something that looked legitimate. His solution was to buy an NFL expansion franchise, which in the mid-60s required not skill or passion but two things: $7.5 million and political juice. Robbie had the juice but not the cash, so he partnered with Danny Thomas, the television actor who was famous, rich, and totally uninterested in owning a football team. Thomas put up the money, Robbie handled the politics, and together they applied for a franchise in Miami, a city that had never had professional football and didn't particularly want it. The pitch to the NFL was simple. Miami was warm, growing fast, and had enough corporate money to fill luxury boxes. What Robbie didn't mention was that Miami had no stadium, no fan base, and a city commission that thought pro football was beneath the dignity of a resort town. The NFL awarded them the franchise anyway, in August 1965. Robbie and Thomas now had 18 months to build a stadium, hire a coach, sign players, and convince Miami that it cared about football. They failed at almost all of it. The stadium issue was solved with a bribe so obvious it made the newspapers. Robbie needed the city to renovate the Orange Bowl, a crumbling college stadium in a rough neighborhood that the University of Miami was actively trying to leave. The city commission refused to spend public money on it, so Robbie went around them. He promised local politicians that if they approved the renovation, he would guarantee them luxury box access, free tickets, and under-the-table consulting fees paid through his law firm. The renovation passed. A Miami Herald investigation later confirmed that at least 4 commissioners received cash payments from Robbie's firm between 1965 and 1967. But by then, the team was already playing. The next problem was the name. Robbie wanted to call the team the Miami Mariners, after a failed minor league baseball team from the 1950s that he thought sounded prestigious. The problem was that Mariners had zero connection to football, and focus groups hated it. Danny Thomas suggested they hold a fan contest instead, offering season tickets to whoever submitted the winning name. Over 19,000 people entered. The most popular submission by a landslide was Dolphins, inspired by the 1963 film Flipper, which had been shot in the Florida Keys and made dolphins a symbol of the state. Robbie hated it. He thought dolphins were too cute, too soft, and too associated with a children's movie. He pushed for Mustangs instead, arguing that horses were tougher and more respectable. Danny Thomas overruled him, pointing out that Miami had no horses, no cowboys, and no plausible reason to name a football team after the desert. The team became the Dolphins. The final problem was money. The $7.5 million expansion fee was due in installments, and by early 1966, Robbie and Thomas were missing payments. Thomas had put up most of the initial capital, but he was now losing interest, distracted by his television career and frustrated with Robbie's political games. Robbie needed new investors fast, so he turned to the one demographic in Miami with liquid cash and no questions: real estate developers. He sold minority stakes in the Dolphins to a rotating cast of hotel owners, condo builders, and land speculators, most of whom saw the team not as a sports franchise but as a tax write-off. Under IRS rules at the time, sports franchises could depreciate player contracts as assets, meaning wealthy owners could claim losses on paper even when the team was profitable. It was, in effect, a legal tax shelter disguised as a football team. The Dolphins played their first game on September 2, 1966, losing to the Oakland Raiders 23-14 in front of 26,576 fans, most of whom had been given free tickets. The team went 3-11 that first season. Attendance averaged under 20,000. Local sports writers called the franchise a vanity project and predicted it would fold within 5 years. What saved the Dolphins wasn't good management or passionate ownership. It was dumb luck in the AFL-NFL merger. In 1966, the same year the Dolphins started playing, the American Football League and the National Football League agreed to merge, effective in 1970. The merger doubled the value of every AFL franchise overnight. The Dolphins, who had been worth maybe $8 million on paper, were suddenly valued at over $20 million. Danny Thomas, who had been trying to sell his stake and get out, changed his mind immediately. Robbie, meanwhile, used the new valuation to secure loans and buy out several minority investors, consolidating control. By 1970, the Dolphins were profitable on paper, even though they were still losing games and drawing small crowds. The turning point came in 1970, when Robbie hired Don Shula as head coach. Shula had just left the Baltimore Colts after losing Super Bowl III, and he was obsessed with proving he wasn't a choker. He rebuilt the Dolphins around a brutal running game and an opportunistic defense, drafting players that other teams had written off as too slow or too old. In 1972, the Dolphins went 14-0 in the regular season, then won every playoff game, finishing 17-0. It remains the only perfect season in NFL history. Joe Robbie, who had bought the team to launder political cash and dodge taxes, suddenly found himself the owner of the most dominant franchise in professional football. He held onto the team until his death in 1990, when his family sold it for $138 million. Not bad for a bribe that got out of hand. Next time, we head north to the NHL and the team that started as a tax dodge for a brewery.